You don't need rich soil to grow a thriving garden. In fact, some of the toughest, most productive plants on Earth actually prefer neglect. While most gardeners spend hundreds of dollars amending soil, hauling compost, testing pH levels, and fighting nutrient deficiencies, these plants are out here surviving in dry dirt, compacted clay, rocky ground, and containers everyone else gave up on years ago. Some of them bloom for months. Some come back every single year with almost no maintenance at all. And almost all of them attract pollinators, improve biodiversity, or provide edible harvests without demanding constant attention. These are the plants lazy gardeners secretly love, because once they're established, they practically grow themselves. And here's the crazy part. A lot of beginner gardeners fail, not because they're bad at gardening, but because they choose high-maintenance plants that demand perfect conditions. Delicate annuals, nutrient-hungry vegetables, plants that collapse the second watering becomes inconsistent. But the perennials in this video are different. They're resilient, they tolerate neglect, they survive bad soil, and many of them actually perform better when you stop over-caring for them. By the end of this video, you'll know 20 incredibly tough perennials that thrive in containers even when your soil is terrible, your schedule is busy, or your gardening experience is basically zero. We're talking drought-tolerant survivors, flowering machines, edible herbs, pollinator magnets, and plants that keep coming back year after year with almost no effort. And before we start, drop a comment below and tell me this: what's the hardest plant you've ever accidentally killed? Everyone has one. Tomatoes? Basil? Succulents? Let's see who had the most dramatic gardening disaster. Now let's build the ultimate lazy gardener's container garden. Container gardening changes the game completely because containers give you control. Even if your backyard soil is terrible, compacted, or non-existent, you can still grow thriving plants in pots, buckets, baskets, grow bags, or recycled containers. And when you combine containers with hardy perennials, you create something incredibly efficient, a low-maintenance garden that practically runs itself. Let's start with one of the toughest flowering plants on Earth. Perennial 1. Lavender. Lavender is what happens when a plant decides comfort is overrated. Rich soil? It doesn't want it. Constant watering? Absolutely not. Fertilizer every week? Lavender would rather struggle than deal with that nonsense. This Mediterranean perennial evolved in dry, rocky, nutrient-poor soil with intense sun and long drought periods. That means most gardeners accidentally kill lavender by being too helpful. They water too much, feed too much, and plant it in heavy soil that stays wet. In containers, lavender becomes almost effortless if you follow one rule: neglect it intelligently. Use a pot with excellent drainage. Terracotta works beautifully because it allows moisture to evaporate quickly. Fill the container with loose, gritty soil. Standard potting mix mixed with sand or perlite works perfectly. Place it in full sun, at least 6 to 8 hours daily. Now here's the important part. Water deeply, then leave it alone until the soil dries out almost completely. Lavender hates constantly moist roots. Wet soil is more dangerous to lavender than drought. Once established, lavender rewards neglect with silver-green foliage and fragrant flowers that attract bees like magnets. The smell alone transforms patios and balconies into something that feels expensive and peaceful. And because it's perennial, it comes back every year stronger than before. Question for you: would you rather grow plants for beauty or for usefulness? Lavender somehow does both. Perennial 2. Thyme. Thyme might be the ultimate lazy gardener herb because it thrives in conditions that kill other plants. Poor soil? Fine. Heat? Fine. Drought? Fine. Tiny container? Also fine. This plant grows naturally across rocky hillsides where nutrients are minimal and rainfall is inconsistent. That's why thyme performs so well in neglected containers. It actually becomes more flavorful when grown under slightly stressful conditions. The key mistake people make with thyme is overwatering. They treat it like basil, which is a disaster. Thyme wants dry feet and lots of sunlight. Put it in a sunny container with well-draining soil, and it practically takes care of itself. What makes thyme incredible is how multifunctional it is. It's edible, it smells amazing, it suppresses weeds, pollinators love it, and some varieties spill beautifully over container edges, creating that cascading look people spend hundreds trying to design professionally. Even better, thyme survives winter surprisingly well in many climates. One planting can keep producing for years, and once established, you can forget to water it for days without drama. That's the kind of plant lazy gardeners need. Perennial 3. Sedum. Sedum is almost unfairly easy to grow. This succulent perennial survives conditions that look completely hostile to life. Dry containers, baking, and full sun? Sedum loves it. Thin, rocky soil? Perfect. Weeks without watering? Not a problem. Some sedums grow low like living carpets, while others form upright clumps topped with flowers that pollinators absolutely swarm. What makes sedum special is its survival strategy. Its fleshy leaves store water, meaning the plant carries its own emergency reserve during droughts. While other plants wilt dramatically after missing one watering, sedum just keeps existing like nothing happened. This makes it perfect for container gardeners who travel, forget watering schedules, or simply don't want gardening to feel like a second job. And visually, sedum looks incredible. Blue-green leaves, bronze foliage, pink flowers, red stems. Depending on variety, it can look futuristic, architectural, or wild. Put sedum in poor soil with excellent drainage and sunlight, and you've basically solved gardening on easy mode. Perennial 4. Coneflower. Coneflowers are survivors disguised as beautiful flowers. These native prairie plants evolved in harsh environments with blazing heat, drought, poor soil, and inconsistent rainfall. That means they're naturally built to handle neglect better than most garden flowers. In containers, coneflowers produce large, daisy-like blooms in shades of purple, pink, orange, white, or yellow, often flowering for months with minimal intervention. And here's why gardeners love them. Butterflies love them, bees love them, birds eat the seeds, and deer usually leave them alone. That's an unusually high return for such little effort. Coneflowers don't need rich soil. In fact, overly fertile soil can make them floppy and weak. They prefer average to poor conditions with good drainage and lots of sunlight. Water during establishment, then reduce watering dramatically once roots develop. These plants are far tougher than they look. And during winter, leave the seed heads standing instead of cutting them down immediately. Birds feed on them, and the dried seed heads add beautiful texture to the garden. If you could only grow one perennial flower in difficult conditions, coneflowers would easily make the shortlist. Perennial 5. Chives. Most people think of chives as just a garnish, which is a huge mistake. Chives are one of the most reliable perennial edible plants you can grow in containers. They survive cold winters, poor soil, neglect, irregular watering, and beginner mistakes without complaint. Once planted, they return every year in dense green clumps that provide continuous harvests for soups, eggs, potatoes, salads, sauces, and basically anything savory. And then something surprising happens. Chives bloom. Those purple pom-pom flowers attract bees aggressively, transforming a simple herb container into a pollinator hotspot. Chives tolerate poor soil because they aren't heavy feeders. They just need decent drainage and occasional watering. Even partial sun works reasonably well. And unlike many herbs that become woody or difficult over time, chives stay productive for years with minimal maintenance. Cut them back and they regrow. Forget about them for a while and they still survive. That's exactly the energy we want in a lazy perennial garden.
Perennial 6. Yarrow. Yarrow looks delicate, but it's one of the toughest perennials you'll ever grow. This plant survives drought, poor soil, heat, neglect, and windy conditions while still producing huge clusters of flowers that pollinators absolutely adore. Yarrow evolved in rough grasslands and open meadows where competition is intense and resources are limited. That toughness translates perfectly into container gardening. The foliage is soft and fern-like, while the flowers bloom in shades of yellow, white, pink, red, or peach, depending on the variety. And here's the beautiful part. Yarrow often performs better in poor soil than rich soil. Too much fertility produces weak, floppy growth. Slight struggle creates stronger plants. That means you can grow yarrow in average potting mix without constantly feeding it. Once established, it requires very little watering and blooms heavily during summer. It's also one of those plants that gives gardens a professional cottage garden look without requiring professional-level maintenance. Perennial 7. Oregano. Oregano grows like it has something to prove. This herb spreads aggressively, tolerates neglect, survives poor soil, and becomes more flavorful under dry conditions. That's why Mediterranean herbs are so valuable for low-maintenance gardening. They evolved under hardship. In containers, oregano forms dense mounds that spill beautifully over edges. It produces tiny flowers pollinators love and aromatic leaves perfect for cooking. And unlike high-maintenance herbs, oregano doesn't collapse if conditions aren't perfect. It keeps growing through heat waves, dry spells, and inconsistent watering. Actually, the biggest danger to oregano is kindness. Too much water weakens it. Too much fertilizer reduces flavor. Too much shade makes it leggy. But sunlight, decent drainage, and occasional neglect, that's where oregano thrives. Perennial 8. Black-eyed Susans. Black-eyed Susans are practically indestructible. These cheerful yellow flowers tolerate heat, drought, poor soil, and beginner neglect while blooming heavily for months. They're native prairie plants, meaning they evolved under tough conditions, where survival depended on resilience, not pampering. In containers, they create bold color with almost ridiculous reliability. And because they bloom so heavily, they attract bees and butterflies continuously throughout the growing season. One underrated advantage of black-eyed Susans is psychological. They make gardens look alive even when other plants struggle. Their bright yellow blooms create energy and movement that instantly improves outdoor spaces. Plant them in full sun with average soil and don't overwater them. Simple. Sometimes the easiest plants produce the biggest visual impact. Perennial 9. Mint. Now, technically, mint is almost too easy. In fact, mint is so aggressive that containers are actually the safest way to grow it. Because if you plant mint directly into garden soil, there's a good chance it tries to conquer your entire yard. But inside containers, mint becomes one of the best lazy gardener perennials available. It tolerates mediocre soil, partial shade, inconsistent watering, and constant harvesting, and once established, it regrows aggressively after cutting. Peppermint, spearmint, chocolate mint, pineapple mint, there are endless varieties, and every time you brush against the leaves, you get that strong, refreshing scent that instantly makes outdoor spaces feel fresh. Mint is useful too. Tea, desserts, drinks, sauces, garnishes, herbal remedies. One container can produce more mint than most families know what to do with.
Question for the comments. If you could only grow one herb forever, what would it be? Perennial 10. Daylilies. Daylilies are famous for surviving almost anywhere. Roadside ditches, abandoned properties, dry soil, clay soil, poor soil, neglect, extreme weather. They just keep blooming. These plants produce grass-like foliage and large trumpet-shaped flowers in nearly every color imaginable. And despite looking exotic, they're among the easiest perennials on Earth to maintain. In containers, daylilies adapt surprisingly well as long as the pot is large enough for their roots. They appreciate occasional watering during extreme heat, but otherwise they're incredibly forgiving. Some varieties rebloom multiple times throughout the season, giving months of color with almost no work. And because daylilies store energy in thick roots, they recover from stress extremely well. Miss watering? They bounce back. Poor soil? Still blooming. Busy schedule? They don't care. Perennial 11. Sage. Sage looks elegant but behaves like a survivalist. This woody perennial herb thrives in dry, nutrient-poor conditions and actually becomes more aromatic when slightly stressed. That's why sage is perfect for containers with mediocre soil. Use fast-draining potting mix, provide full sunlight, and avoid overwatering. That's basically the whole strategy. Sage develops beautiful gray-green foliage that adds texture even when not blooming. And when flowers appear, bees absolutely lose their minds over them. What makes sage valuable is its combination of beauty, fragrance, edibility, and durability. You get ornamental value and culinary value from the same plant. And because sage dislikes excessive moisture, it's far easier to kill with overcare than neglect. Perennial 12. Russian Sage. Russian sage is what happens when elegance meets extreme toughness. Tall silver stems, purple-blue flowers, drought resistance, heat tolerance, poor soil tolerance. This plant looks sophisticated while requiring almost nothing. It thrives in blazing sunlight and actually prefers lean, dry soil over rich conditions. Over-fertilizing Russian sage produces weak, floppy growth, which means lazy gardening accidentally becomes the correct gardening method. In containers, Russian sage creates dramatic height and movement. Wind passes through the stems beautifully, making patios and balconies feel more dynamic and alive. And because the flowers bloom heavily for long periods, pollinators constantly visit. Once established, Russian sage is incredibly drought-tolerant. You water occasionally, trim lightly once a year, and otherwise let it exist. Perennial 13. Hostas. Now, let's talk about shade, because not everyone has full sun. Hostas are legendary shade perennials that tolerate poor soil surprisingly well as long as moisture remains reasonably consistent. Their real strength is foliage, massive blue leaves, variegated patterns, bright chartreuse colors, textures ranging from smooth to deeply ribbed. Hostas create lushness where many plants fail completely, and because they're perennial, they return larger every year. Container-grown hostas are especially useful for shaded patios, balconies, or entryways where flowering plants often struggle. They appreciate occasional watering during heat, but otherwise they're low maintenance. One thing to remember, slugs love hostas almost as much as gardeners do. But aside from occasional slug management, hostas are incredibly easy. Perennial 14. Catmint. Catmint is basically lavender's easier cousin. It produces soft gray-green foliage, waves of purple-blue flowers, and incredible drought tolerance while requiring almost no maintenance. And unlike lavender, catmint is more forgiving about soil quality and watering mistakes. That makes it excellent for beginners. Pollinators absolutely cover catmint during bloom season. Bees especially treat it like an all-you-can-eat buffet. The plant itself forms soft mounds that spill beautifully over container edges, creating that relaxed cottage garden look people love. And after the first flowering flush, a simple trim often triggers another round of blooms. Minimal effort, maximum reward. Perennial 15. Lemon Balm. Lemon balm combines the resilience of mint with the fragrance of citrus. This perennial herb grows aggressively in containers, tolerates poor soil reasonably well, and fills the air with a fresh lemon scent every time the leaves are touched. It's commonly used for teas, calming herbal blends, desserts, and fresh garnishes. And because it grows vigorously, beginners usually succeed with it immediately. Now, technically, lemon balm prefers moderate moisture more than Mediterranean herbs like thyme or sage, but compared to demanding plants, it's still extremely forgiving. And growing it in containers helps control its spread while keeping harvests accessible. One healthy lemon balm plant can produce more leaves than most households could realistically use. That's the kind of productivity lazy gardeners appreciate. Perennial 16. Coreopsis. Coreopsis blooms like it's trying to win a competition. Bright yellow, orange, pink, or red flowers cover the plant for months while tolerating drought, heat, and poor soil conditions remarkably well. This is another native-style perennial built for survival rather than pampering. In containers, Coreopsis creates non-stop color with minimal maintenance. Deadheading old flowers encourages even more blooms, but even without perfect care, the plant still performs impressively. And because it flowers so heavily, pollinators stay active around it constantly. Coreopsis is also one of those plants that psychologically tricks people into thinking you're a better gardener than you actually are. The blooms are that reliable. Perennial 17. Hens and Chicks. If you truly want the lowest maintenance perennial possible, hens and chicks deserve serious attention. These succulent perennials survive unbelievable neglect. Tiny containers, rocky soil, drought, heat, wind, forgetfulness. They just keep multiplying. The parent plant produces baby offsets called chicks, gradually creating beautiful clusters of geometric rosettes that look almost sculptural. And because they store water in thick leaves, they require extremely little irrigation. In fact, overwatering is basically the only reliable way to kill them. Use gritty, fast-draining soil and lots of sunlight. That's it. They're almost maintenance-free. Perennial 18. Bee Balm. Bee Balm combines dramatic flowers with pollinator power. Its bright blooms attract bees, butterflies, and hummingbirds constantly during flowering season, turning even small container gardens into wildlife magnets. Bee balm tolerates average to poor soil reasonably well, especially compared to fussier flowering plants. And once established, it handles drought much better than people expect. The flowers look explosive, almost tropical, while the foliage carries a pleasant herbal scent. And because it spreads gradually, containers help keep it controlled and manageable. Bee balm does appreciate airflow, though. Crowded, humid conditions can encourage mildew, so give it breathing room. Other than that, it's surprisingly easy for such a visually dramatic plant. Perennial 19. Sea Thrift. Sea Thrift survives conditions most flowers would consider abusive. Salt spray, sandy soil, wind, drought, poor fertility. This coastal perennial evolved in harsh seaside environments where survival required toughness. That's why it works beautifully in containers with difficult conditions. Sea Thrift forms tidy grassy mounds topped with globe-like pink or white flowers that float above the foliage like tiny balloons. It stays compact, neat, and low maintenance while tolerating neglect incredibly well. And because it evolved in lean environments, rich soil actually harms performance. Another plant where laziness accidentally becomes expert gardening. Perennial 20, Achillea Moonshine. Let's finish strong with one of the toughest flowering perennials ever created. Achillea Moonshine, a variety of yarrow, combines silver foliage with bright yellow blooms and extreme resilience. Heat? Fine. Drought? Fine. Poor soil? Completely fine. Neglect? Basically preferred. This plant thrives in containers with good drainage and full sun, producing long-lasting blooms while requiring almost no maintenance. And visually, the silver foliage contrasts beautifully against darker containers or green plants nearby. It's one of those plants that makes container arrangements look professionally designed even when you barely tried.
Now, let's talk about the real secret behind effortless container gardening, because it's not just about choosing tough plants, it's about understanding what actually matters. Most plants fail in containers for 4 reasons: bad drainage, too much watering, not enough sunlight, or choosing plants unsuited for containers. That's it. Not magical fertilizers, not expensive tools, not complicated techniques. Drainage matters more than fancy containers. A cheap bucket with holes performs better than an expensive decorative pot that traps water. Sunlight matters more than constant fertilizing. Most flowering perennials become weak and sparse without enough direct light. And watering consistency matters more than watering frequency. Most lazy gardener perennials prefer drying slightly between waterings instead of staying constantly wet. The funny thing is that beginner gardeners often assume more effort equals better results. Sometimes it's the opposite. Overwatering kills more plants than underwatering. Over-fertilizing creates weak growth. Constant interference stresses plants unnecessarily. The toughest perennials evolved to survive hardship, not pampering. That's why these plants work so well for busy people, beginners, apartment gardeners, balcony growers, retirees, or anyone who wants beautiful plants without turning gardening into a full-time responsibility. And there's another advantage people underestimate. Perennial container gardens become easier every year. Annual plants force you to restart constantly. New seeds, new planting, new soil preparation. But perennial systems compound over time. Roots establish deeper, plants adapt to their environment, maintenance decreases, and the garden gradually becomes more resilient with age. That's incredibly valuable, especially now when more people want lower-cost ways to grow food, support pollinators, reduce stress, and create beautiful outdoor spaces without spending hours maintaining them. So here's your action plan. Don't try growing all 20 at once. Pick 3. 1 flowering perennial, 1 edible herb, and 1 ultra-tough survivor like Sedum or Hens and Chicks. Start with containers that drain well. Use decent potting mix, put them in appropriate sunlight, and resist the urge to overhelp them. You'll learn more from growing 3 resilient plants successfully than from struggling with 20 difficult ones. And once you realize how easy these perennials actually are, gardening becomes less intimidating and far more enjoyable. Because the truth is, you don't need perfect soil to grow an incredible garden. You need smarter plants. And now you know 20 of the toughest, most forgiving perennials you can grow almost anywhere. If this video helped you rethink container gardening, hit that like button and subscribe to Plant Care Secrets TV for more low-maintenance growing strategies that actually work in real life. And before you go, drop another comment below. Which of these 20 perennials would you grow first, and which one surprised you the most? Until next time, grow smarter, stress less, and let your plants do more of the work.